Okay. So, welcome to Insights Over Espresso, where we explore how AI is reshaping numerous industries and accelerating innovation. I'm your host, Joe Marone, and today I'm joined by Makaeel Sheikh and Raheem Sheikh, brothers and co founders of NUR AI. Makaeel and Raheem, welcome to Insights Over Espresso. We're excited to have you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Excited
you.
to get into the chat.
Yeah. Well, we touched on this during our pre-call, but for our listeners, could you briefly explain Nūr AI in layman's terms, shedding light on the mirror for your voice concept of the Nūr signal?
Definitely, Joe, and thank you so much for having us again. And to really explain what we're building, it really all comes down to a simple problem that most people today have no idea how they come across in real conversations, whether that be virtually or in person. And this is largely an invisible feedback gap that most people are unaware of, and something that we noticed personally as well. To give a little bit more kind of a background on me. So I come from a scientific background. I studied biology at the University of Pennsylvania and then spent several years working as a scientist and a project manager at one of those large biotech companies down in South San Francisco. And alongside being in the lab, I was also having the opportunity to wear multiple different hats. So from managing vendors to managing CROs, which are these contract research organizations, and both internal stakeholder management and external stakeholder management. I always notice something really interesting after conversations, especially these high pressured conversations like interviews and meetings, networking sessions, that I would always walk away replaying them in my head. And it was really not what I said, but how I sounded that I would always be questioning. Did I come across confident? Did I rush? And did it land the way that I intended it to or the way I meant to? And what struck me the most was almost everyone does this, but we do it kind of alone, right? And rely on our own intuition. And there's no real mirror, as you said, right? For how we show up when we speak. So that's what Nūr is. We're developing a mirror for your voice that solves this gap between what we intend to say and how we actually come across.
Excellent, excellent. So you and Makaeel, you and Raheem both come from, as you alluded to, a strong research background. And even though you mentioned not having a direct speech science background initially, how has that scientific approach influenced Nūr AI's development and its really core concept of measurable communication improvement?
That's a really good question. I can kick it off. So, as you mentioned, we do have very strong research backgrounds. We're scientists by training. I'm actually a current PhD student studying biomedical science. And what we've found really is that the research skills that we've acquired over time and learned professionally are translatable to a lot of different industries and disciplines. So, for example, my training has been in neuroscience and in psychology, but I've found that it's been very easy to translate that now to the speech science space because a lot of the work we do is backed by science and backed by papers published by researchers both nationally and internationally. So it's through reading papers and these publications by speech scientists and leading speakers in their fields really that we inform the work we do here at Noor to make sure that the insights that we deliver to people and the analysis really that the software provides is backed in science.
Yeah, and to add to that, right, both of us being scientists and just the way that we're wired, right, we're trained and wired to be extremely analytical, rely heavily on data and very data oriented solutions. So it also came to the realization, right, that we're tracking all of these different physiological things like our sleep or our steps, our heart rate today. But we almost never track how we actually show up in conversations. And the most I think high leverage skill that you can have is how you're communicating with other people. So something that we noticed was that we're tracking all these different things, but why aren't we doing that to something as important as communication? And taking that analytical and very data oriented mindset, we said, well, why don't we take this scientific approach in trying to tackle this problem as well?
Excellent, excellent. So you categorized Nūr AI within social intelligence and communication intelligence when earlier. What are the most significant shifts you're observing in that space right now, especially as AI continues to evolve beyond generative models?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that really goes back into kind of looking at the broader landscape, right? In AI and machine learning, a lot of the work is being done on the generative side, on helping generate images or generate text or videos. And something that's really important to note is that, I mean, at the end of the day, the most high leverage skill would be able to adopt and adapt and work with these technologies, right? Instead of having them replace your workload, but helping augment a lot of these things, including communication. So what we see is that this next wave of really fundamental and at this moment very critically needed technologies will have to do with how do we actually help augment and understand human behavior, understand signal and understand patterns. So we're seeing this shift of, where technology is helping generate a lot of good content and context, but to actually help you understand and reflect back more actual personal patterns that you have and helping improve yourself from there.
Yeah.
Makaeel said that really well, and I think that it's important to really highlight the vision statement that we've developed as we develop like our business and our partnership. And what we really find is that conversations that empower people to lead, learn, and connect should happen with confidence. And people can't rely on those last minute mirror rehearsals the night before a presentation because that's no longer sustainable. And people entering classrooms, meetings, or leadership roles, especially those who are new to the job market or new to the corporate world, for example, be able to communicate with confidence and clarity and not guesswork. So, because of NOR, what we're trying to accomplish is communication that will be something that people can understand, develop, and then support.
Yes, and what we're really most interested in is AI and technology in today's world that helps humans really understand themselves better, right? In communication, there are a lot of subtle vocal signals, things like timing, tone, rhythm, emotional dynamics, and that people naturally do perceive, we find, but they don't consciously track it, right? And AI and technology, what this next wave of what's really going to be powerful is helping surface these signals and reflect them back to us like a mirror.
Yeah. Don't they say that it's how you say it is more powerful than what you say, or has
Very well said.
greater impact, if I could say it that way? Okay.
Definitely,
Yeah.
yeah. It's often not just the content, right? And I mean, there's decades of voice research, speech science research, and psychology research that supports this, where these subtle signals, these hidden cues within the actual conversation and the context of the conversation have a huge impact on how you're being perceived.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that insight was really very well communicated to me listening to how actors and actresses really approach their work. I never really thought that I would receive an insight like that, learning about like theater arts and what goes into like preparing for a role. But it's seen very evidently in acting and in performance that what you say, how you say it, especially, really conveys how the audience is then going to react to it.
Yeah. Now, when I listen to you, you have a very calm or calming voice tone,
Thank you.
where I'm kinda like Tigger. I kind of come to the table with a lot of energy. I raise my voice and,
And I'm
I
responding to
talk
that.
with my hands a lot, being Italian. But yeah, I noticed like when you spoke about acting, I'm thinking, okay, well, Raheem could be an actor. I mean, it's
I
so
wish, maybe in
calming.
another life.
Yeah.
Maybe another life.
Maybe a psychologist. Maybe I should lie down and say, okay, let's. So when we spoke before, you also explicitly said that NUR AI is not a transcription tool. So
Correct.
because of that, what are the biggest misconceptions you're encountering in the market around or about NUR AI's unique value proposition?
Yeah, and that's really well put. Noor, we very explicitly, and I believe you mentioned this the last time we spoke as well. I think it's on our website as well, that we are not a transcription or productivity tool. We're a reflective, not prescriptive platform
Yeah.
that's really backed by real speech science, science across psychology and perception, showing that these vocal dynamics like prosody, pacing, vocal energy, they carry meaning beyond the words that you're actually speaking. And what's been missing actually in this space because of course there's tons of transcription tools like Fireflies or Otter, or I mean any kind of video recording platform that have their own inbuilt tools, right? Google or Zoom. But what's missing there is there's no real insight on context by context or sentence by sentence level suggestions or insights on, well, did I sound particularly full of energy here? What was my audience resonating with me? And these more psychological and social cues, right, that are hard to sometimes understand when you're sitting across someone online or like through a screen. And so what's been missing in the technology today has been this backing and actual translating real research into something that's reflective and usable in everyday life. And we've been also really fortunate to get guidance from the top TEDx speakers, speech scientists, researchers who've spent their entire career studying speech and communication. And that's been really powerful as well as we've developed this platform, is that, we're not a cookie cutter transcription tool, but it's actually a reflective instrument is what we like to say, right? Because it's not, necessarily even a tool. I mean, I would go as far as to say it's an instrument that really helps you understand your unique instrument, your voice.
Yeah, yeah. So how are you, to expand on that a little bit, and you covered it, but how are you educating potential users about the depth of your, I think you refer to it as acoustic and semantic analysis?
Yeah, go.
I can just kick it off by talking about two terms that we use a lot on the NUR team, which are prosody, and vocal affect. So prosody is some of those mechanical features of voice that we really try to make people aware of, because they might not be aware how, like, for example, some prosthetic values are frequency or intonation, the loudness of their voice, their pitch. And then vocal affect is really the emotional meaning. So we try to make users aware of these minor changes or really minor signals that their voice can convey in that sense. So as you mentioned before, someone who is coming across very like loudly and energetically, they would be perceived as being like engaged in a conversation versus someone who's maybe more shy or timid. They might convey the signal that they're not really paying attention to a conversation. And these aren't really cues that people are consciously aware of. So part of the work that we try to do with Noor is really illuminate these signals for people. That's actually where we got the name for Noor itself. It comes from the Arabic word light. So we really try to illuminate these signals for people to make sure that they're aware of it. And then we also provide like resources from our own readings into the role of speech science and the world of speech science for people to read about themselves.
Right. And in terms of educating, right? I mean, because this is a platform that users do need education on, because it's something pretty new, right? To the concept of voice analysis or voice tracking, because we also say that Noor is like a fitness tracker, but for one's unique communication patterns and habits and tendencies. And communication, as I mentioned, is one of the most highest leverage skills in life, right? I mean, founders raise capital through conversations, leaders inspire teams through conversations, and salespeople, of course, they close deals through conversations. And it's really a wonder, right, that it's one of the few skills where we get almost no objective feedback, and most people are just guessing how they come across. So the way we educate is actually like we're doing right now. It's having these open conversations across these disciplines in speaking and speech science, in executive coaching, in voice coaching, and really trying to understand, well, how will the best, right, of the speakers in today's world make use of the platform, and how it could support their clients and their engagements as well, instead of replacing them, but actually making it a more instrumented process.
Okay. So let me ask you a question. What do you call the output? Is it an assessment of my vocal traits per se?
We actually avoid the term assessment because
Okay.
one of my favorite aspects of NOR really is that it's non-evaluative. And I can share an example of what that might look like from my own experience. So in my current PhD program, we're often tasked to give presentations on some of the research we've been working on in the lab. And in my program, everyone in the audience receives a survey where they basically write about how well the person is presenting. And the last question on that survey is always, did this person have any distracting mannerisms that can be corrected or improved on? And reading some of the responses that I have received and my friends have received, it's always been speaks too fast, speaks too quietly, maybe their voice is cracking. And that is very evaluative and it does seem like an assessment. And I really like and that's why it's one of my favorite features of Nūr, that we are providing people with a safe environment and we're not really holding them to any external norms or societal norms for how they're supposed to speak. We're really just trying to augment and really help them speak the best that they can do.
Right,
Okay.
and to add to Raheem's point, which he beautifully articulated, was that we don't love the word assessment. We see Nur as a reflective platform, not a prescriptive one. And the idea behind it is that, I mean, everyone's communication is so different, right? And so it would be really hard to scale it in terms of comparing you to a population norm, and it would feel, more judgmental, to be honest. So the way that we've developed Noor is that everything is actually based on your own personal baseline, right? So people can be using Noor in and around moments that already matter, right? After an important meeting, or during a difficult conversation, or during a presentation or interview. Instead of just guessing how you're coming across, you're seeing these patterns that are very specific to you and your own personal baseline, which you create when you actually sign up for the platform. So things like clarity, pacing, conversational balance, or vocal energy. And over time, what becomes powerful isn't necessarily fixing a moment or fixing a speaker. It's actually watching how you evolve across so many different conversations, across so many different contexts, and you're getting a picture of your own really personalized communication journey.
Okay.
Yeah, this is
So
very
I guess where I was going was trying to figure out for the listeners, how does one get a reflective output? I mean, what's
yeah.
the process?
Let's tell them about the why don't you tell them about the Nūr Signal,
Yeah, absolutely. So what we actually call our, what the reflection you actually see is called the Nūr Signal, which is our core IP, and a kind of scoring mechanism which helps evaluate these different five core pillars that we have, which we call clarity, confidence, authenticity, resonance, and connection. And so of these five pillars, plus your Nūr Signal, which is like your composite score, which is like a weighted average of these more subscores, these five core pillars. You see this across both real-time conversations, whether you're using kind of like the desktop platform, or using the mobile platform, or seeing this across even weekly kind of reflections and daily reflections, which help really guide how you've been performing, right? Across these different contexts, day by day, week by week, and month by month. And so this Nūr Signal is actually based on these decades of research across speech science and linguistics and voice psychology and sociology. And so what the core innovation here isn't necessarily the science, because that's been very well validated for the last few decades or so, but it's the actual unification and fusion of all these different disciplines coming into one cohesive and very easily understandable metric that people can relate to.
Joe, I can give an example as well, talking about one of the cooler features that we're working on with our team, and that's our live overlay feature. And essentially, if you're on a call like we are on now, or if we're on Zoom or Google Meet, the live overlay feature would basically be visible to me, but not everyone else on the call. And for example, if I'm speaking and all of a sudden I might be using a lot of filler words because I'm confused, I'm not really sure what I'm trying to say next, I can see right on the screen in front of me that my confidence score is going down as I'm talking. And I'm also receiving live insights as I'm speaking, giving me advice on maybe like what to say next or how I can improve or recover from any confusion I might have caused in the call.
Yeah. Okay. I noticed that a lot doing a lot of podcasts, that when you go through the raw recording, there's a lot of filler words.
Yeah.
Yeah. For the average person.
Yeah. And everyone's guilty of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So you're targeting a very diverse group, as I'll say your ICP. I mean, consultants, founders, executives, creators. How do you prioritize? And we spoke a little bit about this, but I'm sure the audience would like to hear as well. How do you prioritize these distinct user segments?
Yeah, and I think this really goes back to like where we see the long-term vision for Noor as well, right? And I think in the long run, what we believe is social intelligence and communication intelligence will become as normative and normal as fitness tracking itself, right? As normal as tracking your weight or tracking your sleep. And it's not to make people perfect, but it's to help them be more intentional and more aware, which is why well, something as huge a topic as communication, right, encompasses
Yep.
various different disciplines. And but with our main ICP, right, we target and we're really trying to empower speakers that are in these high stakes conversations on a daily basis. So, from consultants to executives and founders being our core ICP. And then, of course, that also spilling into podcasters and creators. Kind of as our secondary market as well. But we're really focused on these high level executives and founders and consultants who are having these really crucial conversations that can really impact how a deal closes, how one gets funded, and how one is actually coming across to investors or to their advisors or ambassadors, for example. So we really try to focus, and we've developed a system in mind with these consultants and executives in mind, depending on the kinds of insights that they would find really valuable right in the moment. And that's how we definitely have importance, and our large focus, right, is in these main 2 3 disciplines, because that's where we see the highest value, especially starting out, and then also validating the platform as we want to venture out into other segments as well.
Very well said.
So, what unique communication challenges do you see in each of those groups that we mentioned facing NUR, specifically design? Well, I should say, what unique communication challenges in each group facing NUR? What are you specifically designed to address for each group? Is it different with the executive versus the consultant versus the founder?
Yeah, and I think there's actually a lot of similarities, right? And I think the main one being the idea that, especially actually the higher you kind of get up the corporate ladder, the more important your role is. You definitely have this feeling of self consciousness, right? So people definitely across these different, but very, I mean, different but very similar environments see that a system shouldn't be judgmental, right? And the moment that someone is feeling evaluated, they stop being themselves. And that's very similar, across executives in high level kind of C-suite discussions, principals at like a consulting firm. And then that's why we've designed Noor to be around reflection rather than correction or prescription. We don't give kind of prescriptive instructions or scripts or anything like that. We only surface these hidden signals and patterns that people can interpret in real time, right? And most people honestly don't need better advice. It's largely that they need a clearer mirror.
Okay.
I can also try to provide some examples off the top of my head if that would help. I'm thinking about consultants, for example. I took a class in undergrad called data storytelling, and it was a very important class because it helped me understand that data, like conversation, is very hard to communicate sometimes. And for a consultant, that's an especially large challenge because they need to prioritize structured storytelling. So clients expect recommendations that follow a clear and logical structure and lead
Mhm.
to a persuasive conclusion. And if a consultant is not properly conveying that information, they can really use Noor to help facilitate that and help improve those skills so they're not necessarily losing their clients to confusion or that lack of structure. And when I'm thinking of like high stakes communicators, like executives, like you mentioned, one of their challenges I would hypothesize is precision under pressure. So they need to be sure that the messages that they're conveying are very carefully worded because even small phrasing errors can create legal, reputational, or political repercussions for them.
Interesting. I speak to a lot of VC firms,
Hmm.
and um, they tell me that one factor that they look at in a founder, not only like what are you trying to build, and is it driving value, or will it drive value, but look at the person's education. I mean, your pedigree. I mean, did you come from Harvard and Yale and MIT and Stanford and Oxford? And they look at that as, okay, well, that's a cloth that makes us different, or makes them different and potentially successful. Could I also suggest to them that, hey, they should also look at NUR as another way to articulate, behavioral science as well as voice?
Yeah, I would definitely say that. And that's actually an issue that's very personal to us because Makaeel and I are both first generation and we're new to the startup world. We're young entrepreneurs. And we find that it's very important for us to work with diverse people, especially since we created such a diverse team. And it would honestly be a shame to not recognize someone's talents just because of their pedigree, or maybe because they're lacking like efficient ways to communicate their ideas. And one of the groups of people that I really think about are people whose first language might not be English, and they're now approaching like the job industry. They're getting their first job right out of undergrad, and they really want to succeed and have this mobility in their career. And we see Noor as a way for them to improve their speaking skills while not necessarily like losing their diversity or losing their vernacular, but being able to improve and make themselves more communicable.
Yes. I mean, I was shocked when a lot of the VCs began to repeat when they look at founders, they're looking at the pedigree of the school. Um, saying, well, okay, well, if that was the case, Sam Walton didn't even finish high school. I
Huh.
mean, well, and he built a pretty small company successfully, right? Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned starting with a voice first approach for launch and then eventually moving towards multimodal input. Well, first of all, for the audience that might not understand, well, what do you mean voice first and then multimodal? What does that mean? And then secondly, what were some of the key technical challenges you faced in ensuring, consistent and signal processing across various hardware? And how did that pivot to a personalized baseline address these?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's what's really important to talk about is, well, communication has kind of these three main, again, I'm going to say pillars, but these three core pillars, right, of communication, which encompass, of course, your voice being part of it. And there's also body language, so visual context and biometric and physiological behaviors as well, right? Like your heart rate and your breathing rate and how your eyes are dilating and things like that. So there's these three main parts of communication which we've always been fascinated by, right? I mean, why do two different people saying the same exact thing sound so different or have a completely different meaning behind it, right? Like what else is going on has always been a question that we've always been interested in, as far as, I mean, since we were younger, even, right, in middle school and high school. I remember talking to Raheem about things like this. And so, of course, to develop a platform, though, we definitely wanted to hone in and do this in a phased approach so that we can really give each aspect of communication the attention that it deserves. And of course, there's a lot of complex data and computation on the back end that's involved as well as part of our Nūr Signal engine and intelligence layer. So we decided that we would focus first on voice and validate these vocal signals first, right? So which is why heading into launch, which is expected for public beta in the next 4 weeks, is to be live with voice 100%. But of course, we're continuously testing visual context and biometric feedback as well, which creates this multimodality, as we like to say, this multimodal system. And I mean, there's definitely to answer the second part of your question, the complexity in trying to understand all of this information and data and presenting it in a way that's really easy for a user in layman's terms to understand, was to actually make the actual insights and kind of gentle nudges phrased and structured in a way that feels like it's going to be really helpful in the moment, across different contexts, across different conversations, and longitudinally as well, right? Because another important feature and an aspect of Noor is being able to track these long term, right? So it's not just real time, which has its own kind of complexities in latency and response time and sentence structure, and kind of also taking into account issues of, well, you don't want to overload the user with so much information on their screen. So how do we kind of prevent decision fatigue or cognitive dissonance, and making sure that we're not really front loading the user when they're already in the middle of a conversation. So that was definitely a lot of behavioral research went into actually developing the platform and presenting research and these numerical values in a way that's really understandable. And then of course more hardware complexities definitely arose because everyone has different systems, different laptops, and different mics, right? So to get
Yeah.
past that, actually, right? I mean, that was part of, I mean, on top of the fact that we never wanted something to be a population norm or you being compared to a population norm, but also, which is why we went into, establishing a personal baseline on your own specific computer and system. And then from there, developing your personal data set across the Nūr platform. So that's really where the hardware issue, kind of got resolved for us. And Raheem can, of course, share some of those other issues that we saw in terms of scoring and actually developing it early on.
Yeah, we really had to work with very closely. And actually, Makaeel is just now returning from a trip from South Asia, working very closely with our team of software engineers to make sure that the product is ready for launch. We had to make sure that, like, for example, the data that we were presenting to the people was accurate and the training algorithm was diverse. And Makaeel can probably attest to the fact that it's very hard to communicate and work on software, especially across time differences. And that was a challenge that we really had to overcome with our team to make sure that we were prioritizing effective data analysis while also making sure that the product itself is being developed.
Okay. So looking ahead, how do you envision Nūr AI evolving?
Yeah, I can absolutely speak to that as well, right? I mean, where we see this going in the long term is making it as normal as it is for you to track your fitness and even things like the amount of water you drink, making it as normal for people to understand and track their communication across different people and across different contexts. And it's not to make people perfect, right? And we really emphasize this because we want people and users to be more aware and intentional about how they're communicating with other people and the kinds of things that they should focus on that are not necessarily context related. So if you actually understand how you show up in conversations, you don't actually need as much external validation, we find, right? You just communicate with more clarity and presence and being more in tune and in line with your internal and external state. And in a world where AI essentially is automating more and more tasks, right? I mean, there's a new productivity tool every day. Human communication is becoming even more valuable. And long term, we see Nūr injected into daily life as as easy it is for you to pick up the phone and kind of understand, well, did I gain weight?
Mikhail said it really well. We really try to imagine voice as a biometric, especially since people already track their fitness very closely. People are tracking their sleep. So we really thought, why not track your voice? Why not track the words that you're saying and how you're saying them?
Yeah, interesting. Hey, so segue from the last question, what do you see the long-term vision for the Nūr Signal and its application in both virtual and in-person communication settings? I mean, is there a difference between how I speak online versus how I speak face to face?
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely these nuances, right? That, and of course, with the kind of use of these technologies kind of after COVID for meeting, Zoom and Google Meets and all these kind of video interfacing platforms that we have now, people online, especially if you notice, I mean, we often are shortening our responses. People are more keen on interrupting other people a lot more, and so we're essentially seeing that communication has fundamentally changed with the use of these virtual technologies. So with Nūr Signal, which is the kind of what's under the hood, right?
Yeah.
Empowering both virtual and of course with a wearable that we have slated for the end of this year by Q4 as well for in-person conversations and having more always on capabilities. We do see the Nūr Signal continuously evolving, and that's, another magical thing about it is that the more you utilize Nūr, the better and more accurate your personal Nūr Signal becomes. And so, it's actually continuously updated on the back end after 5 sessions, and it's continuously updating and giving you a really good and accurate picture of how you're coming across, right? And what these different surface level and under the surface patterns are saying about you in all these different conversations. So, to answer your question a little bit more shortly, We do see it becoming more and more accurate and more complex as we introduce these other nuances, and which is why we want to start only with voice, right, and not have these other modalities also intertwined from the get-go, is so that are really focused on giving people the best insights that we possibly can in terms of voice across these different conversations.
Yeah. So being an early stage startup, I suspect manual processes can be a significant bottleneck. So where do you see the biggest opportunities to leverage AI and automation to really streamline your own internal operations, such as content creation, lead qualification, or user support as NUR AI scales?
That's a really good question. And I will have to say that I'm very grateful that we can now use AI to really help with outreach. So while Makaeel and I really do try, and we love to really speak with people ourselves through conversations like this, whether they be the TEDx speakers, speech scientists, I do really appreciate that I can also reach out and create a network of people interested in this field using AI and finding people that are working in this space. And Makaeel might also have some other ideas about how we've been using AI internally.
Absolutely. I mean, as a startup, right, an early stage startup, I think lead generation and getting the word out there and actually educating, as we talked about before, about a platform such as Nūr, which is really not something that has been out in the commercial space widespread before. It's really educating and getting as many intros and connections and conversations out of people who really understand the space, of course, but also can make great use of a platform like Nūr in their professional and personal lives. Nūr, of course, itself, we really love and we leverage, tons of automation technologies to help us generate these leads, to do the messaging and the cold calling and the kind of setting up the meetings for chats like this, right? Because at the end of the day, automation is great in terms of, kind of getting your foot in the door. But at the end of the day, nothing beats human interaction, human communication. So I think,
Yeah.
especially going into, of course, these next few years and with the advancements in different automation technologies, what's going to be really crucial is how do you find that balance of human in the loop and then also letting kind of automation get your foot in the door.
Yeah.
While I'm sympathetic to people who are skeptical about I really do believe that at Nūr, we're trying our very best, and we really are not making robots. So we're not trying to make robots out of people. We do want people to be natural. We want them to be good communicators. But at the same time, we see the power of AI. And while I agree that there's definitely been a lot of overuse in AI, I'm personally not using AI to write my text messages or my emails. I do really think that there's a large role of AI, especially in the communication science space, which is why now is really the perfect time to leverage that and develop Nūr in its entirety.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of a follow on to that question is how are you currently with this beta wait list that you have? How are you thinking about systematizing lead gen and converting interest into pilot programs or paid tiers, especially for your priority ICPs?
Yeah, definitely. And so, with kind of like top of the funnel, as people enter the top of the funnel, right, through these kind of automation technologies from our own cold outreach, from people actually reaching out to us, which we're really fortunate to see as well, almost every day, kind of people that are really interested in what we're building and giving us the opportunity to share more. We definitely see, technologies in terms of outbound emailing, nurturing campaigns as well with our ICP to really understand. And also, I mean, another core part of our GTM strategy is really putting our ICP in these kind of persona buckets, if you will, right? And really trying to understand, well, what sort of personas are using Nūr for this specific application, and what is this specific persona? How are they using or intending to use Nūr differently? So it's definitely been not only just outreach and outbound and lead generation, but it's actually even more doing research on the ICP and understanding, where their pain points are, where the bottlenecks are. And from there, we're able to offer solutions that cater to those.
Future, we also want to host focus groups and really ask the main ICP, especially for their feedback on Noor, to see how we can continue like developing and improving it. And I especially am very excited to plan the focus groups because I think having real like in-person conversations, real-time conversations with people to see how they're using Noor and benefiting from Noor, maybe which features they like the most. And this is actually some advice we've received from the speech scientists we've been talking to. We can better improve the application.
Hmm. Okay. So hypothetically, if you had a magic wand to fix one thing in NUR AI right now that's either holding you back or slowing you down, what would that one thing be and why?
I think I wouldn't necessarily use a magic wand on Noor, but maybe on myself because
Maybe on the world. I
I'm
thought you were
kind of
going to
I'm
ask
a
on
little
there.
bit I'm definitely, someone who's, I would say, impatient, but building a startup has taught me that you're gonna get hit, every day a bunch of times, and you
Yeah.
just have to be willing to keep going and not give up. Especially when it's something like Newer, which we're so passionate about, and honestly doesn't even feel like I'm working half the time, right? I mean, it's just honestly a personal kind of personal knowledge discovery for me even, right? And trying to understand, as a scientist, as I've said, right, I've always been really interested and intrigued by these really advanced systems which help you have more human insight, actually, conversely. So the magic wand would go to me to make me even more patient, even more resilient, and always, we're already open to feedback all the time, but being even more open to feedback and having more conversations and honestly just not running out of energy ever.
Okay. Okay. So basically, I thought you were going to say when you said me that you wanted to clone you so that there'd be
Yeah,
two,
that would help too. But
two
I
of
mean, I have
you
Raheem
and
as
get
well,
Yeah,
more
so
work
we don't
done.
need clubs. We have each other.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
So, for founders or product leaders listening, what advice would you give them about integrating AI into their product development process, particularly when building a solution that requires deep understanding of human behavior and communication?
It's a really good thought. I think off the top of my head, I would say to prioritize clean code and labeling. So when we were first beginning to develop Noor with our team of software engineers, one possible approach could have just been to like throw a bunch of code at the wall, see what works, see what comes together. But Makaeel and I found that it's very important to make sure that the code is written properly. And we're employing what's called SHAP analysis and SHAP labeling to make sure that the map with that we're basically mapping features based on importance level so that when we use and employ our machine learning model, it's able to be properly interpreted, especially in the code. So that when any like changes or bugs need to be resolved, we know exactly where to go. Would you agree, Max?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I would definitely agree, and kind of going back to the fact that I've always really been drawn to systems, right, that help people understand really complex things more clearly. But communication itself is so unique because it sits at this intersection of both skill and identity. They kind of go hand in hand. And that's why feedback around communication can be so personal, especially with most tools trying to fix people. We're building Noor around a different belief, that real growth comes from awareness and not correction. So my advice to product managers and PMs and product leaders would be to not only integrate tools that make you more productive, but also integrate tools that make you more aware and help you understand yourself so that you can, of course, then with that awareness, do something with it.
Mm, okay. So, where can people learn more about NUR AI, follow you, or get in touch with you? Either of you, both of you.
Yeah, and if what we talked about resonates, first of all, thank you again, Joe, for such a great chat. If what we spoke about resonated with you, definitely visit us at mynur.ai. We're actually opening up early access and have a growing wait list, and we'll be sharing more updates there.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you're interested in seeing more content from us, especially some conversations Makaeel and I have about speech science and our work, please check out our Instagram page at Scientists.
Okay. So, Makaeel and Raheem, thank you again. Your insights, I think, were fantastic. And we'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.